Previously, we've been dealing with the book of Revelation the last few times we've been together. We've talked about chapter 1 up through the very beginning of chapter 13, and trying to hit some high spots of several chapters every time that we actually have one of these sessions. On this occasion, I'd like to stay in chapter 13 because there are a couple of things that are very prominently talked about in religious circles that I really want to address. To begin with, in this chapter, John sees two beasts. A beast that comes out of the sea is the first one, beginning in verse 1. There's a beast that comes out of the land, beginning in verse 11. And they work in tandem, they work together, but there are really some differences about them as well. The beast of the sea seems to indicate with a military might and power the government that is persecuting Christians, which would be very indicative of that Roman government in that first century. The second beast, the beast that comes out of the land, seems to indicate those that are advocating false religion. How do you arrive at that kind of conclusion? Beginning in verse 11, the statement is made, "I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And this beast performs great signs," the beast out of the land, performs great signs so that he even makes the fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast. And then the thought continues. So if that first beast is indicative of that military might and this second one indicative of false religion, how do I get the false religion out of these verses? Back in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 13, there's something that Moses stated that would come to the mind of those individuals that actually read this designation of this beast from the land. Deuteronomy chapter 13, beginning of verse 1, Moses says, "If there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, Let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Interesting statement. Imposters. With a certain amount of truth, with a lot of falsehood mixed in, with some ulterior motive, individuals that deceive the people. And in this chapter, there's a statement that is made in verse 16 concerning this land beast. "He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." The mark of the beast. Talked about quite often in a lot of religious circles. In the commentary that was written by David Roper, which I think is an excellent commentary in the book of Revelation, because he pulls a lot of scholarly works together and notices what a lot of individuals state. For example, Merrill Tenney makes this statement in a book on Revelation he wrote back in the mid-1960s. "If you'd walked down the main street of a Roman city in the days when the book of Revelation was written, you might have seen coming towards you a man with a white brand on his forehead or on the palm of his hand. The letters or figures burned into his flesh would have identified him as the slave of the man or as the devotee of the god whose brand he wore." Well, what about the idea of that buying and selling? And here's what Roper writes. "Since the mark has to do with buying and selling," verse 17, "some have identified the mark as a symbol used in commercial life. Bank numbers, barcodes at the supermarket, social security numbers, and the like. During World War II, some in America were convinced that ration stamps were the mark of the beast." And then this comment. "None of these modern-day interpretations would have had any meaning for early Christians. In context, the mark of the beast is the counterpart and counterfeit of the seal of God." Tremendous statement. Another individual concerning the buying and selling. Under the various emperors, beginning with Tiberius, all business documents had to be sealed by a government stamp, without which the transaction would be invalid. The sanctions were applied by local authorities, sometimes the priesthoods of various cities, who fostered the worship of the reigning Caesar. Mark of the beast. And then you continue to the very end of this chapter in Revelation, chapter 13. Verse 18, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. The mark of the beast. And for generations, people have been trying to figure out who that is without really looking at the context and what it says. Now, there's a term that is used, in fact it's used in this quote, and I'll talk about what it actually means, about the way that people try to decipher the meaning behind this number 666. Alan Johnson, in his book on Revelation in the Expositor's Bible Commentary, writes this: the sheer disagreement and confusion created through the years by the gematria method should have long ago warned the church that it was on the wrong track. If John was seeking to illuminate believers so that they could penetrate the deception of the beast, as well as to contrast the beast and his followers with the Lamb and his followers, in chapter 14, 1 and following, he clearly failed. That is, if he intends for us to play the gematria game. Gematria game? It's a Hebrew word. It refers to assigning value to each letter of the alphabet. And people have been trying to figure out who that beast is, that has this number, the mark of the beast. Who is the beast? Who is the Antichrist? And been coming up with all sorts of suggestions for generations. In fact, years ago, I remember a strong emphasis by a particular religious group that the Antichrist, that had the mark of the beast, and you knew that because of the way that the letters in his name added up to 666, was Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State for the United States. Isn't that amazing? People have seen Adolf Hitler. They've seen Nero, as long as you put the word Caesar with Nero. All of the symbols that we've seen so far in the book of Revelation, we recognize as being symbolic. Why is this the one item that is not symbolic but literal? Why is that actually the case? In fact, the statement is made, the number of a man, the number, here's the verse again. Here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. Okay, so it's a person. Well, the definite article is not really in the text, at least in the manuscripts. It's the number of man. In fact, the way the NIV, International Version, reads, verse 18, this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number? 666. There's another statement that I'd really like to read for you from another author. Homer Haley wrote this in his book on Revelation. The number of the beast, 666, stands for the complete and total failure of all human systems and efforts antagonistic to God and His Christ. All are doomed to ultimate and complete defeat and failure. This explanation is in harmony with the theme and purpose of Revelation. And he's right. If you were to assign value to numbers, and people talk about that, well, 7's that perfect number. 6 is just shy of that. 6 is an evil number. And this 666 is the mark of man. It is incomplete. It is evil. It has heart problems, and it's multiplied over and over and over. Put your trust in people. Even well-intentioned people, well-meaning people, are going to disappoint you sooner or later. Cannot put your trust in people. Your trust always needs to be placed in God. And if I start taking a look at this book as it was written, and think about the audience who were the first recipients of this letter, here's a book of encouragement. Here's a book that we need to read with an understanding that this was written to show those persecuted Christians that the cause is not lost. The sufferings that they face, even as dire as they turned out to be during the persecutions that Rome placed upon Christians. Those sufferings, as dire as they were, are not the end, and it's not failure. Victory is still be found. Truth will still raise its head above error. God's power will rule supreme. Jesus is in control as the Redeemer of humanity. And that blood that was shed on the cross will always be available to cleanse men of their sins. Chapter 13, interesting chapter like the rest of them. Remember, the mark 666 is the mark of humanity. That's what the text says. And I can't see everything else as figurative. I try to point this out as a definite literal number that is to be found in the name of one particular person. It fits many. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.